Welcome back to the Malt Miller YouTube channel. Today we are talking about the anatomy of a keg. James, recently we've done a lot of content about packaging beer.
Yeah, we have, whether that be bottling, whether it be transferring under pressure, loads of different bits and pieces, but we have had some requests to go a bit deeper into the world of kegging, right?
It's really highlighted that we've got new customers coming in that are new to kegging, so we need more information about how a keg works, how to strip it down, how to clean it. Basically everything about kegging.
Yeah, like maintenance, you know, what you need to do to get the best out of your kegs, how to get the longest life out of them, and really how to enjoy the world of kegging, because there's nothing cooler than having your beer on a keg at home, whether that be in a kegerator or a keezer, being able to just go up to it, pour a pint, half a pint, whatever it is you want. It's just super cool.
And it's really, really easy, but there are a few things that as a new entrant into the kegging world that you really need to know, and that's what we're going to debunk.
Now, before we jump too far into kind of digging into how to look after a keg, how to strip it down, it's important just to touch on actually why we've got this array of kegs in front of us, because they represent kind of the most common examples of what people are going to be using at home to package and serve their beer from, right?
Yeah, and they range from various different sizes, right from 5 litre, or in some circumstances even smaller, but 5 litre, 12 litre, 19s, also a 19, but a used 19.
Yeah.
And then we move into the plastic products. Now, plastic pressure rated products are really, really gaining in popularity. And actually the pressure rated fermenters work on the same basis as a keg. So the learning that you'll take from today that we're talking about kegs, in many, many cases works exactly the same on the pressure rated fermenters.
Exactly. And as you said, these new kind of plastic, smaller size kegs are really gaining some traction, partly because they're really affordable, they're versatile, easy to use, easy to store.
Yeah.
They offer quite a lot of benefits if you're going to be like moving beer around, taking it to places, going camping in your camper van, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But broadly speaking, this is a really good selection of the kegs that we stock here. We've got loads of other ones. If you want to check out more of that, then head to the link in the description below, which will take you to our whole keg section, where you can see the whole host of different sizes and configurations that we offer. Now, we've cleared the table just to make it a little bit easier for us to dive into the anatomy of a keg in a bit more detail. But before we jump into that, if this is kind of the first video that you've watched about kegging and kegs, Rob, what's a keg?
In basic terms, it's a stainless steel pressure vessel. The beer's placed inside, it's sealed up, and it's forced out, pushing CO2 in.
Yeah.
So pushing CO2 in forces the beer out the keg. Because it's a pressure vessel, we can also force carbonate in the keg if we wish to.
Yeah. Rob, for people that have maybe heard of casks and cask beer and beer being served from a cask, how does a keg differentiate from a cask?
Yeah, big question, actually. A cask is not a pressure vessel. A cask relies on air getting into the cask to allow the beer to flow out.
Yeah, generally speaking, on a cask setup, you'll have a beer engine, hand pull at the other end.
A pump,
yeah.
So you're pulling the beer out.
Yeah, exactly. It's got a pump inside that is drawing the beer out. Air needs to be able to get in to equalise the pressure so that you can continue to draw the beer out, right?
Otherwise you're creating a vacuum inside the vessel.
Yeah. And the benefit of a keg, by having CO2 going into it as you're taking beer out, means that the beer stays fresh.
Exactly. There's no air contact with the beer.
Yeah, because a cask, really, after a cask has been tapped, you've got maybe 4 days to drink through that beer, 5 at a push, depending on the cellaring conditions.
Depending on the publican.
Yeah.
The other thing about a keg is the product outside has a dip tube that runs to the very bottom of the keg. So the first beer that you're drawing from the keg is the beer right at the very bottom, and they're actually designed to be almost 100% draining.
Rob, take us through then the general kind of components that you would find on one of these stainless steel style corny kegs.
Okay, because the bottom's dished, all right, we need a safe, stable bottom. So they all have rubber bottoms with a stable base on. Similar at the top, we've got a rubber top that doubles as handles, but it also enables the workings of the keg to be protected so it can't be bashed about.
Yep. And then in terms of like the working parts, the moving parts, what have we got?
We'll always have a lid.
Yep.
All right, so we'll have a lid that fits onto the keg with some type of silicone seal around the outside, a PRV, all right, a pressure relief valve so that we can't over pressurize the keg. We'll also have posts. Now each side, these are called posts, and they what allow us to connect the disconnects onto, to allow the product out and the CO2 in.
Yeah, and inside those posts, there's a little mechanism, isn't there, which allows the beer to flow or the gas to flow once we've connected the disconnects.
It's that makes this a sealed vessel. So these are self-closing, they're actually called poppets. So they're self-closing. So as soon as we take that disconnect off, the keg is then sealed again.
Yeah, and it's like a little spring construction inside, generally speaking, little stainless steel plugs, some silicone rings that, open and close, dependent on, like you said, whether you've got the disconnect on there.
There's a couple of different designs of those as well, which we are going to talk you through.
So what about on the inside of our keg? What are the different components in there?
On the underside of the CO2 in, there's a very, very short dip tube. On the underside of the product out, there's a dip tube, as we've said, that runs right to the very bottom of the keg. Different size sockets are required to take different types of kegs apart, and we'll go into that a little bit later.
But if I'm connecting this up, I can't see what's on the inside, right? Because it's sealed, the lid's on. How do I know then which side to put which disconnect?
Various different kegs have various different ways of actually telling you which side is which. There's a few golden rules that we always follow. Most kegs will have at least written on the keg in and out, or at least out.
Yeah.
There's another way to tell. On the gas side, there will always be some sort of differentiating marking. So in this example, there's a groove on the gas post. There'll always be something on the gas post. It might have a knurled edge to it, or it might have a groove in it. The one way we can remember, which is quite nice, is groove is for gas.
Yeah, grooves for gas. Yeah. And then the product outpost is generally standard, doesn't have any differential markings.
No, it's just plain. And at this point, it's really important that we point out that these are not interchangeable, and we don't want to be putting disconnects on the wrong posts.
So we've now got two kegs that look reasonably similar in front of us on the table, Rob. We've got an AB new 19 litre keg, and we've also got one of our Malt Miller 19 litre kegs as well that are new. What's the differences here?
It's worth actually speaking about how these kegs came about, and actually they weren't designed for the beer world at all. Even though they're absolutely ideal for serving beer, they were actually designed to carry syrup for soft drinks.
Okay, so like when you get draft Coke or draft lemonade or something like that.
Yeah, I mean they were all doing it. Coke, Pepsi, Canada Dry, Schweppes, they all had various different kegs that they were using to carry the syrup, and then they would mix with soda water at the bar.
Yeah.
They've now moved to bag in a box for the syrup, so these are redundant. Hence the reason why there is thousands of used kegs on the market.
Yeah.
Now they differ, and they differ because the construction of the posts is slightly different. When they were used in the soft drinks industry, it was important that they were clean in place.
Yeah.
So they could put the posts on, which were doubled up as cleaning mechanisms, so they could actually do a clean in place process. So the actual design of the actual stainless steel post is slightly different. And on the modern malt miller kegs, they have a simplified poppet system within the post. And actually, when you take the post off the keg, the poppet falls out. It's just a poppet and a spring. It falls out. It's actually a much more simplified than these Italian AEB kegs, and like the kegs were when they were used for soda syrups, where they've actually got a poppet with a 3-legged spring in, and the poppet stays in place even when you take the post off the keg.
Right, okay, so I can see the benefits then of the newer style when it comes to stripping down and cleaning and maintenance, right?
Well, you say that, but we can still do a clean in place using our, if you've got a dispense setup, then you've got a dispense setup that can do clean in place. Depending on what keg you've got, if you've gone for a used keg, because they were manufactured by countless different people and there was countless different thread sizes, you've got to be really careful about taking posts off one keg and trying to put it onto another, because it's quite likely, with the amount of different design variations, that this post here will not fit on a used keg that was made in the 70s, for example.
Right, okay,
it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So always, if you've got a used keg, always keep like for like. So if you're going to take the post off, make sure it goes back on the same side on the same keg. That's really important.
Right, cool, nice.
The spares that we have available for anything brand new is, we've got everything, everything you require. What we can't have is everything that you require for every keg going back to the 70s. You know, there's such a myriad of different constructions. What we do have now is the 3-pronged poppet device that goes into these posts. So my advice was, if you've got a leaky poppet valve on a used keg, you can replace the actual poppet. It's a little bit tricky, but you can replace the actual poppet, including the little 3-leg prongs. You can replace that rather than throwing that post away and trying to replace that whole post. And that's a really important point.
Or having to replace the entire keg because you can't get the post.
Exactly.
So we've got some of the smaller, kind of more portable travel kegs on the table now, for want of a better phrase. Why have we got these on the table, and what do we want to distinguish between these and the larger ones we've already looked at?
These have got all of the components that the larger kegs have got. They're just in a slightly different format. So we've got a product out, which is yellow in this case, connected to a dip tube, which is going to the bottom of the vessel. But these actually screw on and off of the actual head, so that makes them easier to disassemble. Same fittings, product out, gas in, and a PRV. Exactly the same.
Yeah, I guess the main thing to distinguish between these two setups and the larger Corny style kegs that we've already looked at is that all of the kind of working parts, the components that you would need to strip down for cleaning or to replace, are separate to the vessel itself. Whereas on those, you know, the posts are going through the lids, the lid has got the PRV built into it. It's just a different way of approaching the same solution to serve beer on draft, right?
Exactly, yep.
So we're going to come on to maintenance of kegs now, and actually we will show you how to strip a keg down, but before we get into that, we want to talk about cleaning, because if you ask 10 different homebrewers how they approach cleaning their kegs, you're likely to get quite a few different answers on that topic. Rob, what's your approach to cleaning a keg?
I simply do not take it apart before every batch. I would get my used keg, I would fill it about 1/3 full with my chosen cleaning solution. I put the lid back on, get it sealed back up, shake it about like crazy. I'd leave it for 15 minutes or so. I'd then push that cleaning solution out through both posts.
Okay, yeah.
All right, using CO2. I would then make sure it's completely empty, and I would do exactly the same with rinse water.
Yep.
And then I would do exactly the same with no rinse sanitizer.
Cool. So that 3-step process means that you've then got a keg that's cleaned, sanitized at the end of it, right?
Definitely.
And because all of the components that are going to be coming into contact with your beer are going to be the components that are going to benefit from the cleaning solution and the sanitizer, I completely understand your approach there to not stripping it down, because actually it's quite a lot of labour involved with taking one apart, putting it back together. There will be times though when you're going to need to do that, right? Now we're talking about maybe if you've had like a saison in your keg that's got a diastatic positive yeast strain that you don't want carrying over into your next batch of beer. It could be a wild fermentation with some funky yeasts and bacteria, or it could be that you've had an infection in a beer which you've had to dump and you don't want that infection carrying over into your next beer, right?
It could be as simple as you've had some hot material get into the keg and it's blocked a post.
Yeah. Now, the other time where you want to strip the keg down is if you need to do kind of restorative maintenance, right? So a component has failed, you've got a leaking poppet, you know one of the seals might need to be replaced. So where would you go to start with when it comes to stripping your keg down?
Well, first of all, I take off the lid. Then find out which side is the gas side, and I would take the gas post off first. Now we do that with a 17mm socket.
Yeah, and that differs, doesn't it, on the new kegs versus the like AEB style kegs and the older kegs?
Definitely, I would actually differentiate them differently. So these kegs are made in China and they have the simplified posts.
Yeah.
Almost all of the kegs with the simplified posts are 17mm sockets. The kegs with the poppets with the 3-pronged poppet valve,
yeah,
those ones are generally 22mm.
Right, okay.
So we just need to simply undo the gas side. Now these do not have to be done up really, really tight because they're on silicone O-rings. So it's not the tightness that's stopping them, that's allowing them to hold pressure. It's the compression of the silicone O-ring.
Okay.
And actually, the more we do it up, the more it compresses the O-ring. So
you can actually end up with the O-ring like splicing out a plate,
yeah,
and causing more of a leak.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be done up as hard as you possibly can.
I noticed as well that you used a deep socket there as well.
Yeah, it's got to be like a deep socket or like a spark plug socket, that sort of thing. So we need to be careful when we take this off because the spring and poppet are loose in here. So we need to take that out, make sure we don't lose any bits, put that to one side. You'll notice in here is the short little tiny dip tube.
Yep.
With a silicone seal on it.
Okay, and that's our gas dip tube, right?
Exactly. Next off comes the product out. Now this is the one with the dip tube that goes right to the bottom of the vessel. So again, need to be careful that we don't lose the poppet and the spring.
And this process, in essence, is exactly the same for the other style posts, just actually the poppet is going to stay in place on the inside.
Yeah, it stays housed in. Right, now we noticed about this long dip tube. So what I was talking about earlier about these pressure vessels being 100% draining, we've got a bend on the bottom of the dip tube so that it can go right into the dish on the bottom.
Yeah, nice. And then from here, you would then potentially need to soak all of your deconstructed components in cleaning solution, rinse, and then sanitize if you were cleaning an appropriate point in your cycle. If you were trying to remove some form of infection or a yeast that has been in a previous batch that you don't want to carry over into your next batch, you're probably going to need to look at then taking the silicone rings off, giving them a boil potentially, and then reconstructing from there.
Or, to be fair, all of the silicone components of these kegs are so cheap to replace, you can literally replace them. And actually, while we're talking about that, the O-rings on the posts are actually the same size as you'll find on hose lock.
Oh,
so
okay.
actually, if you ever in a situation where you've split one of these and your hose lock ring fits.
Brilliant. What about the lid, Rob? Do we need to do anything to kind of deconstruct that?
Wow, we've got a hatch ring
Yeah.
That comes apart, that can be replaced as well. Sometimes these compress to the point where actually they don't seal very well on the lid.
Yeah.
Actually, a good thing to think about here is also the way that the lid actually fits into the keg. These two legs are made out of a sprung steel, and sometimes these go slightly out of adjustment, so we can adjust these by pulling them out with a pair of pliers to actually make them force the lid up harder or less.
Yeah, okay.
So that's worth noting on these lids. We've also got feet on here. These are replaceable as well. And also the PRV. Now the PRV works in a very similar way to the poppet valves in the posts. So it comes completely apart, and again, that's replaceable for a brand new PRV, but we also do the silicone seal that's on those. And actually, when you've got a leaking keg, that would be my first port of call, because where that seals into the dished out part of the machining in there, actually you only need a slight bit of hot matter or a bit of debris in there and it stops that sealing. So that would be my first port of call for any leaks. James, actually, while we've got this lid off, we're going to take the opportunity to replace this hatch ring.
Yep.
Actually, Kegland have brought out a new hatch O-ring, which is made of a different material that actually allows less oxygen into the keg. They reckon that this yellow one is less oxygen permeable than the original. So let's take this opportunity to swap that out and pop that back on there. That's as simple as it gets.
Should we move on to getting our keg put back together now?
Sure.
So
dip tube in first. Now this needs to be remembered. We've got to put it back on the right side. All right. So long dip tube outside.
And the other thing to make sure is that when the dip tube goes down, it is actually centered in the bottom of the dish, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
you won't get, if it's wrong, you won't get it. You won't get it fully home. So I'm going to make sure that I'm putting the right post on, and that isn't, because it's got grooves in it. I know it's gas. So that sits over there. Sit the poppet and spring on the top. Put it back in and screw it on just a couple of threads.
Yeah, start it by hand to make sure that you're not going to cross thread it.
Exactly. I'm going to do exactly the same with the other side. Small dip tube in. That's actually got tabs on it which allow it to face in the right, sit in the right direction.
Same method, sit the spring on top, start it off by hand.
That's it, we're now ready just to tighten them up.
We nearly had my fingers.
I did. Again, they don't need to be tight. One thing that we haven't touched on is we actually advocate using keg lube on the silicone components, and there's nothing wrong with giving them a spray of silicone, food grade silicone lubricant, or you can get a actual grease in a tube and just smear it on the silicone parts just to make it move more freely. And actually that's especially on the post silicone. It just makes putting the disconnects on much easier, and it makes them last longer. I hope that this video has shown you the anatomy of a keg and how to maintain it.
And if you've got further questions, thoughts or comments, please hit us up down below in the comments section. We will come back to you. And please make sure that you have subscribed to our channel, you've hit the bell for notifications, you've given this video a thumbs up.
And of course you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.